Alright, this video we're going to do a quick review. It's really going to be all mental math, and we're just going to go over basic adding and subtracting numbers. More importantly, when you throw negatives into adding and subtracting, how does that affect your answer, or what we call your sum? Alright, first thing you can take down is absolute value, the definition. This is the distance from a certain number to 0 on the real number line. Keyword there is distance. So if you have distance, it's always going to be positive. Now absolute value, if you ever see this in a problem, I'm going to put 3 in there. If you ever see these bars that I'm putting here around the 3, that means absolute value. So that means is absolute value of 3 is 3, because it's 3 units from 0. If I did the opposite of 3, which is negative 3, the absolute value of negative 3, well, that's still 3 units from 0, so that still equals 3. So you can see how when you take the absolute value of a number and its opposite, you get the same thing. All right, we're going to use that when we add a positive and a negative, this definition of absolute value. All right, let's keep this quick and simple right here. All right, when we add integers, let's move this up. All right, when we add integers, if you add two positive numbers, take this down, your sum is going to be a positive. Okay, it's like money. If someone gives you $5, then they give you another $5, well, you have $10. So it's positive right there. You know, there's your example. Right? If I had 5 plus 5, just add the numbers, and your answer is still positive. Now, likewise, if you move over to two negative integers, if you add two negative numbers, your answer is still going to be a negative. Here's the example with the money. Let's say you're in debt. Let's say you owe someone $5, and then you owe them another $5. Well, in all, you owe them $10. Or you could say it's negative 10. You're in debt, negative $10. So the example right here is, if you had negative 5 plus negative 5, well, you still add the numbers. You still add the absolute value of negative 5 and negative 5, so it's 10, but then you keep the negative there. All right, a lot of students will get that confused. If you multiply two negative numbers, you get a positive, but here, if you add two negatives, you still get a negative. Okay, and then if we move on to the second part of adding, okay, you can take this down where we have different signs. This is if you add a positive and a negative, and in some cases, your sum is going to be a positive. Some cases, the answer is going to be a negative. So take this down. Really what you do is you take the difference of the two numbers and then you keep the sign of the number with the bigger absolute value. Okay, what do we mean by that? Let's look at two different cases. Let's say we have, negative 2 plus 5. All right, so you're adding a negative and a positive. What you would do is you would take the difference of 5 and 2, and you would take the difference of their absolute values. So we know the absolute value of negative 2 is 2. So if you take the absolute value of 5 and negative 2, right, we get 5 and 2, and you take the difference of it, 5 minus 2 is 3. Now the number that has the bigger absolute value is this. Right, absolute value of 5 is 5. Absolute value of negative 2 is 2. So what that means is, since this is positive, our answer is going to be positive 3. Now if I took the same numbers and I switched around the negative and the positive, so for second example, I'm going to put 2 plus negative 5. Right, I'm adding a positive 2 and a negative 5. So if I just take the difference again of their absolute values, the difference of 5 and 2 is 3. But now the number with the bigger absolute value, it's still this. Okay, absolute value of negative 5 is 5. Since this is negative, our answer is going to be negative there. So those are two cases where if you add a positive and a negative, you could get a positive answer, or if you add a positive and a negative, you could get a negative answer. Whichever number has the bigger absolute value, you take that sign for the answer. All right, so just to look at a couple examples. Let's see here. Let's look at a couple examples that kind of go off the different signs. Like if I did this, negative 1 plus 4, well, if I take the difference of 4 and 1, it's 3. And the number with the bigger absolute value is the 4, and that's positive, so my answer is positive 3. If I look at number 2, right, these are mixed signs, negative 7 plus 3. If I take the difference of 7 and 3, right, because the absolute value of negative 7 is 7, we get 4. but since the number with the bigger absolute value is -7, I leave a negative there. Okay? The last part, subtracting, it's really kind of the same thing. You can put that down, add the opposite. It's almost like if you had, if I just did number 5, move it up a little bit. If you had 3 minus 5, this is the same thing as saying 3 plus -5. So then if you had a positive and a negative, I do the same rules. The difference of 3 and 5 is 2, but since this -5 has a bigger absolute value than the 3, the answer is -2. Okay, if we did 6, if you did -1 minus 5, this is like saying -1 plus -5. And then since you're adding 2 negatives, you're still going to end up with a negative. Then just add the numbers. 1 plus 5 is 6, so your answer is -6. Okay, last thing I'll put, this is the star right there. If you subtract a negative, this is where you add a line, change the sign, meaning this becomes positive. So it really becomes -1 plus 7. And you take the difference of those, it's 5. This is the bigger absolute value, it's positive, so our answer is 5. Same thing for 10, you would just do 11 plus 7, which gives you 18. All right, should be basic stuff, adding and subtracting. You really should pay attention to when you get a positive for your answer or when you get a negative.